In a surprising move, a group of scientists and activists made a desperate decision to release wild bison into an area where they had been extinct for over 200 years. It was a leap into the unknown. No one knew if they could survive. Many skeptics shook their heads. The conditions were too harsh, the resources too few, and the population too fragile. By 2009, only 11 bison remained in the reserve. Their fate seemed sealed. But thanks to the efforts of people who believed in miracles, their number grew to 30. And in 2014, the first 17 bison stepped onto the wild land of Romania. It was a moment of hope, fear, and anticipation. Could they survive in these mountains, where there was no infrastructure, no protection, and no functioning ecosystem? To understand the scale of what was happening, we must go back in time. Once, bison roamed freely across Europe, from the forests of France to the Caucasus. These massive herbivores played a vital role in maintaining ecological balance. They created trails, spread seeds, fertilized soil, and made space for other species. But step by step, humans pushed them out. First, farmers cut down forests for fields, and the bison lost their migration routes. Then came hunters with guns. In the 15th and 16th centuries, hunting bison became a status symbol. They were killed not just for meat, but for trophies. The final blow came during World War I. In Poland's Białowieża forest, the last significant wild population of bison was nearly wiped out by German soldiers. By 1927, there were no bison left in the wild. Only 54 survived in captivity. The world had lost its giants, leaving behind only a weak link, descendants of a vanished world living in zoos. But the story didn't end there. Scientists decided to fight back. In the early 1930s, breeding programs were launched in Germany, Poland, and Russia. Out of all the remaining bison, only 12 had enough genetic diversity to save the species. Every birth was tracked, every animal registered to avoid inbreeding. This was one of Europe's first experiments in genetic conservation. In 1932, the International Society for the Protection of the Bison was founded. Despite wars, political disputes, and crises, the scientists never stopped. By the 1960s, the captive population began to grow. But the biggest question remained. Could bison return to the wild? It turned out the bison wasn't just a large animal. It was an ecosystem builder. Its movement and behavior reshaped the environment. It awakened forests, made room for grasses, flowers, insects, and birds. Without it, the landscape was dying, as had happened in the Carpathians. Then came the idea. What if bison weren't just preserved in zoos, but reintroduced into the wild, not for display, but to restore nature itself? Thus began the most ambitious rewilding project in European history, and it started in a dying Romanian forest. In May 2014, history was made. 17 bison stepped into freedom in the wild Carpathians. The first time in 2 centuries. Scientists applauded, locals recorded videos, journalists wrote glowing headlines. But behind the euphoria was fear. What if it all failed? This wasn't a zoo. This was real wilderness with unpredictable conditions. The first months were a true test. Some bison struggled with the climate and new food. One male, named Dark, disappeared on the 4th day. He was later found, exhausted and with an infected leg. He didn't survive. It was a worrying sign. Maybe they truly weren't ready? Still, the project continued. In 2015, a new group of bison was brought to the region. Rangers monitored the herds 24/7 using GPS collars. But the technology often failed. Signals dropped, batteries died, and one collar stopped working entirely, later found ripped off by a bear. With each day, the reality proved harsher than theory. Some animals got lost, others wandered into villages, frightening locals and trampling fences. Rumors spread. Bison are aggressive, they destroy crops, they're dangerous. Some demanded their removal. People who once applauded the project now filed complaints. Funding was in jeopardy. Partners questioned if it was worth the investment. Under pressure from farmers, local officials began demanding reports. One misstep could destroy years of work. But just as the project seemed on the brink of collapse, everything changed. In the fall of 2015, a ranger team checked a camera trap and found images that took their breath away. A young female named Selena, one of the first released, was pregnant. No one expected it this soon. Just a year ago, these bison were in captivity. Now they were starting a wild population. Scientists, skeptics, even locals held their breath. Could she carry and give birth in the wild? The answer came in the spring of 2016. A calf was born on the misty slopes of the Carpathians, a symbol of hope. This was more than a birth. It was a message. The bison weren't just surviving. They had made the forest their home. Even more amazing, the calf was strong and curious, exploring the terrain under his mother's watchful eye. The news spread across Europe. Even the harshest critics admitted, this is a success that can't be ignored. And then came a chain reaction. Over the following year, 3 more calves were born. Their survival rate turned out to be higher than expected. The herd began to expand and form internal bonds. Males displayed hierarchical behavior, while females gathered in protective groups. The calves followed their mothers along newly established paths. Seasonal routes began to emerge. The bison chose specific valleys and elevations to navigate through thickets and graze. No one expected change to happen so quickly. But this was just the beginning. With every step the herd took, the forest began to transform. This wasn't merely the recovery of a species. It was the reawakening of an entire world thought long dead. And although new challenges lay ahead, it had already become clear. They didn't return alone. They brought with them a force capable of reviving nature itself. The birth of the first bison calf was a spark, but the real fire ignited later. By 2017, the herd had grown noticeably stronger. Every new calf born in the wild Carpathians felt like a miracle. But what truly stunned scientists was how quickly the bison began to change their behavior. Instead of cautious loners, they started to move like a unified organism. Leaders emerged. Inner conflicts surfaced. Courtship rituals began. Behaviors thought to be lost after centuries in captivity returned in full force. But with that came new challenges. One spring, a group of bison unexpectedly left their usual pasture and wandered into a neighboring valley outside the monitored zone. GPS collar signals were lost. Rangers spent a week combing the hills, fearing the worst. Then came a report from villagers. Large silhouettes had been spotted in the mist on the village outskirts. When the project team arrived, they witnessed something extraordinary. The bison stood on a long-abandoned farming field. But what truly amazed them was the land itself. Once dead soil, it was now covered in young grass and flowers. It seemed as if the bison had literally brought the land back to life. Scientists couldn't believe their eyes. Cameras and drones recorded a burst of biodiversity. New plants appeared. Birds returned. Tracks of hares and even lynxes became visible. What was once considered a lifeless patch had come alive in just a few months. How was this possible? The answer lay in the bison themselves. Their powerful hooves broke up the hardened soil, allowing moisture to penetrate. Their fur and dung carried seeds, and the places where they lay became ideal sites for new ecosystems to form. What was once theory was now visible to the naked eye. The bison weren't just surviving, they were transforming the land itself. By 2018, their impact had become systemic. Cameras began to capture the return of bird species like skylarks and wood sandpipers. Insects followed, especially bees and butterflies, which hadn't been seen there in decades. The more flora returned, the more the process expanded. Foxes, hares, and boars began to appear in the newly cleared spaces. Rangers even noted an increase in wolf tracks. But the most surprising discovery came from soil analysis. Organic matter levels had risen. The land retained more moisture, and in some places, carbon concentration had doubled. The once dying forest was beginning to breathe again. Still, not everything was smooth. In 2019, a bison died while trying to cross an old road littered with forgotten barbed wire. This sparked renewed debate. Some media outlets reignited criticism, claiming the project was dangerous, the animals were suffering, and the ecosystem unstable. Support wavered again. But this time, the response was entirely different. Local residents, the same people who once feared the bison, rose to their defense. They gathered signatures, spoke at meetings, and demanded that authorities clear migration corridors. They personally removed old wires, built wooden bridges across ravines, and joined patrol efforts. People were no longer afraid. They were proud. At this point, the project underwent a transformation no one expected. What started as a controversial idea became a grassroots movement. School children learned about the return of the bison. Tourists came to see the giants grazing in blooming meadows. And anyone who saw the image of a massive bull standing in the mist at the forest's edge felt they were witnessing something more than just an animal. They were witnessing the return of something believed to be lost forever. And the most astonishing part was still ahead. The herd was preparing to cross borders and redraw the map of wild Europe. By early 2020, something unprecedented happened. The bison began leaving the original release area. One male, named Gorn, ventured far beyond known routes and reached another valley, in the heart of the Domogled Valea Cerne National Park. It was the first time a bison had independently crossed a natural corridor between protected territories. GPS data confirmed the unbelievable. He had traversed dozens of kilometers through mountains, slopes, and rushing streams, guided only by instinct. Scientists were stunned. It meant just one thing. The bison hadn't just returned. They were restoring lost connections between the fragmented forests of Europe. This was the beginning of a new chapter. Between 2020 and 2022, the herd not only grew, but began exploring new territories. Cameras captured bison in areas where they hadn't been seen for centuries. But the most remarkable discovery came from a genetic analysis in 2022. Scientists compared the DNA of bison born in the wild with that of animals brought from zoos. What they found changed everything. The level of genetic diversity among the wild-born bison was higher than expected. Inbreeding rates were declining. Genes were being refreshed. Nature itself was selecting the strongest. It was a true evolutionary leap. And it was at this moment that nature itself intervened. In the summer of 2022, the region was hit by the worst drought in a decade. Rivers dried up, pastures scorched, and animals suffered from a lack of water. Many feared this would be the end. Several bison disappeared from observation zones. For 2 weeks, rangers couldn't find them. Everyone braced for bad news. But then, a drone patrolling a remote ridge captured something incredible. 6 adult bison and 3 calves had found a water source in an old riverbed, a place where water hadn't held for decades. They didn't just survive, they led others there. Thanks to their movements, ancient trails began to reactivate aquifers. It was as if the bison could sense where life still lay hidden. This ability to survive and adapt shocked even the harshest skeptics. That same year, a landmark agreement was signed between the national parks of Tarku, Domogled, and Retezat, officially opening over 100,000 hectares of protected territory for the bison to roam freely. Thus was born one of the largest wild zones in Europe, not just for bison, but also for wolves, lynxes, deer, and many other species. People no longer argued. They built bridges, carved trails, created shelters and observation points, all for one purpose: to preserve this miracle. But the most powerful argument came from something no one had expected. At the end of 2023, a study from Yale University revealed that the 170 bison, occupying just 48 square kilometers, were capturing over 54,000 tons of carbon dioxide annually. Their simple behaviors, grazing, fertilizing the soil, loosening the ground, were turning dead soil into powerful carbon sinks. That's the equivalent of emissions from 43,000 cars per year. What was once seen as a symbol of the past was now saving the future. Yet the most touching transformation was how people themselves changed. In villages where bison were once feared, festivals were now held in their honor. Children painted bison on school walls, and elders told their grandchildren about the day a silhouette appeared in the fog, a creature no one thought they'd ever see again. What started as a controversial experiment had become a cultural and spiritual revival. And still, it wasn't the end. By 2024, the bison were about to do what once seemed impossible: become the largest wild herd in Europe. This change carried with it one final, monumental transformation. By early 2024, what just 10 years ago seemed like a mad idea had become the continent's largest wilderness restoration project. The southern Carpathians had become home to over 210 bison, half of whom were born in complete wild freedom. These animals had never known cages, had never seen people behind bars. They lived, moved, and bred as their ancestors did centuries ago. But then something happened that no one expected. Cameras captured the herd moving through an ancient mountain pass where bison hadn't been seen for over 300 years. On the other side lay abandoned lands, thought uninhabitable even for deer. And it was precisely there the bison were heading. Scientists rushed to the area and were stunned. The bison weren't just exploring new ground, they seemed to be intuitively seeking out and restoring lost fragments of ecosystems. Land once considered barren was, within months, covered in soft grass. Rare plants emerged. Ants returned, then bees, then birds. But the most dramatic moment came with a discovery. In one of the remote valleys, rangers found tracks from other bison, adult individuals without collars. It was assumed all bison were accounted for, but these weren't. They weren't listed in any registry. At first, they were thought to be escapees. The DNA analysis delivered a sensational result. These were descendants of a wild population believed extinct for over 50 years. It was a shock. Somehow, a small group had likely survived in the mountain forests, far from human presence. They had lived quietly, secretly, avoiding contact, like spirits of the ancient woods. And it was the return of the larger herd that drew them from the shadows. Now, the wild and the restored lines were merging into one. This was more than success. It was a historic reunion of a species split by time and human greed. After this, the project went international. European environmental organizations began working on a plan for green corridors to link isolated forests, create migration routes, and make the Carpathians the beating heart of the continent's wilderness. It all started with just 17 bison released into the unknown. Now, it was about restoring entire ecosystems, affecting climate, biodiversity, and even the economy. But the most emotional moment came in the fall of 2024. In the mountains, a calf was born. Her name was Hope. Her mother, Selena, one of the first released females. Her father, Gorn, the very bison who first crossed the mountain pass. Their story became a symbol. Two animals, shaped by danger, loss, and struggle, had brought forth life, born into a fully restored wilderness. Hope became not just the face of a new generation of bison, but of a new Europe. A Europe that had reclaimed what it had lost, restored balance, and perhaps, for the first time in a long while, was able to hear the silence of a living forest. Today, walking through the Carpathians, you might see a giant silhouette emerge from the morning mist atop a hill. Standing still, gazing into the distance. Beside it, a small calf, barely steady on its feet. This is not just an animal. It's proof that nature doesn't give up, that if given a chance, it will return. Loudly, powerfully, and forever. If you enjoyed this incredible story of nature's return, subscribe to our channel so you don't miss more breathtaking stories.